Hey guys, so today we're going to be working with angles, right? We're going to be working with angles, all different types of angles. We're also going to be calculating angle measures and all that. So before we start working on angles, we need to know what an angle actually is, right? So an angle, which almost all of you know by seeing, is a point, it's a ray, and then it's another ray. So in essence, an angle, all it is, it's just two rays, right? Two rays that meet at this point, that's called a vertex, right? That's all an angle is. It's an angle that always has some kind of measure. For this example, we'll say that this angle here has 32 degrees. Just picking it up, just making up a number out of nowhere. And again, that represents degrees, right? That's just used to refer to how big an angle actually is. In this case, this angle is 32 degrees. And before we actually start working with angles and all that, I want you guys to be able to know that when we're dealing with angles, it is important to be able to name them. Just like everything else, whether you're talking about segments, lines, rays, all of that, you need to be able to label them, right? So we have an angle right here, right? And again, it's got a vertex, it's got a point right there, it's got another point right there. Let's call this F, T, R, right? And so when you're labeling an angle, it's always important to go in order. So for example, for this angle, going in order, you can call it angle FTR, right? FTR, because I started at one end and then went straight through, right? So FTR went in order. And since we're talking about an angle, we can draw this. And what that is, that represents an angle mark, right? All that is there, it's just to represent the word angle. Right? So we can call it angle FTR. We can go backwards and call it angle RTF. RTF. And the most basic way, it's by labeling it with one point. Out of these 3 points, point F, point T, and point R, the most important point is always the vertex, right? So if the vertex is the most important point, always label it with that as well. We can call it just angle T. And so again, the reason we can call it angle T is because that's the vertex. And also notice, if we're labeling this right all the time, the vertex should always be in the middle. It should always be in the middle, right? One way that we would know that this is wrong, so those are all 3 right answers, 3 ways to label it. One of the wrong ways to label it would be if we were to call it angle R, F, and T. And the reason that that's wrong, right? The reason that that's wrong right there is because, again, you're going from R to F to T. And what you can't ever do, since R and F aren't connected, you can't ever jump around, right? So that would not work. You can't ever jump around. You always have to go in order. FTR, RTF, or just angle F. That's all it is. There's always 3 ways to label a given angle, right? So we're talking about angles, and there are different types of angles based on just the measurement of that angle, right? So we have an angle that's called an acute angle, right? An acute angle. And what an acute angle is, it's an angle that's greater than 0. It's greater than 0 degrees and less than 90, right? So it's greater than 0 and it's less than 90, always. So when you're looking at an acute angle, right, it's always gonna be a smaller angle. So something like 20 degrees would be acute, right? Because it's less than 90, greater than 0. Something that's like this, not that, sorry about that. That's actually another one, that was my mistake. If you have something that looks like this, right, where that would be 85 degrees, that would be acute. Something that's 74 degrees, something that's 83 degrees. All of these are acute angles just because they're all greater than 0 and less than 90. So if it's between 0 and 90, it's acute. And then the one that I raised is something called an obtuse angle, right? And what an obtuse angle is, it's actually greater than acute. And an obtuse angle is going to be greater than 90, greater than 90, and less than 180, less than 180. And again, since we're talking about angles, always put in the degree signs. And that's what an obtuse angle is. It's an angle, one, that already looks bigger, right? And so that would be obtuse, right? Something that would be, let's say, 95 degrees, something that is 110 degrees. All of these are all obtuse because, again, when it's an obtuse angle, it's always greater than 90 and it's less than 180. That's greater than 90, less than 180, greater than 90, less than 180. They're all obtuse. If it's less than 90, and that's the number you always want to think of. If it's less than 90, it's acute, right? If it's greater than 90, it's obtuse. But then the question is, what happens if it's in exactly 90 degrees? And again, probably a bunch of you know that already. If the angle is exactly 90, it's what we call a right angle, right? And what a right angle is, it's an angle that's exactly 90 degrees. Exactly 90. And there's an easy way to see this. A lot of times people will see this and they'll assume that that's a right angle. It looks like a right angle, but it's not. Because in order for this to be a right angle, it always needs this box right there. That little square in the corner of an angle tells you that that's 90. The second you see that, yes, it's 90. But if they don't ever give that to you, you can't ever assume. So always make sure that they give you that. If you see that square there, it's a right angle. It's exactly 90. If it's not there, you can't assume. So if it's exactly 90, it's a right angle. Then there's another one called a straight angle. And a straight angle, it's actually bigger than an obtuse angle. A straight angle is exactly 180 degrees. Straight angle is exactly 180 degrees. And the reason why they call it a straight angle, it's because it's straight, okay? It's straight. And I'm just showing you this just to show you that, one, that's a line, right? And we know that it's a line because it has two arrows, right? Goes on forever in both directions. And it's a straight. And whenever it's a line, whenever it's a straight angle, it always adds up to 180 degrees. Oh, this whole thing here, just the top part adds up to 180 degrees. So if it's a line, or if it's straight, adds up to 180. Straight angle is exactly 180. A right angle is exactly 90. If it's between 0 and 90, it's acute. If it's between 90 and 180, it's obtuse. So always think that. So now again, if you were to see something that's 52 degrees, that's acute. Because it's greater than 0, less than 90, right? If you were to see something that's 90 degrees, that's right. Because again, it's exactly 90 degrees. If you were to see something that's, say, 97 degrees, that's going to be obtuse. Because again, an obtuse angle is always greater than 90, less than 180. So always remember, if it's less than 90, it's acute. If it's greater than 90, it's obtuse. If it's exactly 90, it's right. And if it's exactly 180, it's straight. But again, more formal, acute, greater than 90. Acute is less than 90, greater than 0. Obtuse is greater than 90, less than 180, guys. And now that we know what all these different angles are, now it's just being able to calculate, right? So we know how to label angles. And from labeling them, now we can actually figure out what angle measures are going to be, right? So we have this angle right here, right? Now we have that. And so we have three different angles, right? And some people may see it already, some people may not. Those three angles. You have the angle on the left side, the small one there. You have the angle on the right side, the small one there. And then you have the whole angle, right? That's A, that's C, that's E, that's B, right? So what I'm going to say is, I'm going to say that, and here's another thing. Whenever you see that, that just stands for the word measure, right? Whenever we put that M, it stands for the word measure. And again, we use this just to not have to write out as much. So we know that the measure of angle ACB is going to end up being 45 degrees, right? So angle ACB, we see ACB, that's 45. I'm going to tell you that the measure of angle BCE is equal to 40 degrees. Let's change it. The measure of angle BCE is going to end up being 60 degrees, right? What I want you to find is I want you to find the measure of angle ACE. That's the angle that I want you to find, right? And it has to do with what we did last week during the lesson. What we did last week when we worked with segments and finding the measures, it was knowing if you're trying to find the whole thing, whether you're trying to find a part. And if you were trying to find the whole segment last week, you add. If you were to try to find a part of a segment, you subtract. So it's easier a lot of times just to see it in the picture than it is to see it written out. So we see that ACB is 45 degrees, right? So angle ACB, we know that this angle is 45 degrees, right? We know that angle BCE, we know this angle here is 60. So now if we're trying to find ACE, what we know is ACE represents the whole angle, right? So if we know that that's 45, we know that that's 60, we want to find the whole angle, ACE. If you're trying to find the whole angle, you always add. Whenever you're trying to find the whole thing, always add, which ends up giving us 105 degrees. And that's our answer. We know that ACE is going to end up being 105 degrees. And again, the reason you know that, ACE represents the whole thing, and when you want to find the whole thing, you always add, right? And now, thinking to other examples. What happens if I'm trying now to find a part? And again, a bunch of you already know that answer, right? And again, let's just practice it just to make sure for those of you that may not see it. Let's say I have this, right? We have that again. We have three angles again, right? Let's call that U. Let's call that H. Let's call that L. Let's call that K, right? So I'm going to tell you the whole thing. I'm going to tell you that HUK, the measure of angle HUK is equal to, let's say it's 87 degrees, right? And again, since it's 87 degrees, it's an acute angle because it's less than 90, greater than 0, right? Now I'm going to tell you that angle HUL, the measure of angle HUL, I'm going to tell you is going to end up being 50 degrees, right? So HUL is 50. The one that I want to find is this one right here. I want to find the measure of angle LUK. That's what I want to find. And again, sometimes it helps just to actually see the numbers written in there. Let's see what we know. We know HUK is the whole thing, right? HUK. We know that the whole thing is 87 degrees, right? We know that this whole thing is 87 degrees. We know that HUL, we know that this angle here is 50, right? What we want to find is we want to find LUK. We want to find LUK. We want to find this. So what does that represent? That represents a part, right? Since we're trying to find a part, whenever you're trying to find a part, you always subtract. And again, if we know that the whole thing is 87, we know that this piece is 50, so all we would have to do is we'd end up subtracting, right? The whole thing, 87 degrees, minus the part, 50, equals 37. And then again, 37 degrees. And that's our answer. And again, the reason that we know it makes sense is, let's say that we said it's 37, right? We put 37 right there. If we were to add these two pieces together, 50 and 37, it gives us 87. So it's saying when you add up the two pieces, it gives you the whole thing. Good way to always check it. So always remember, if you're trying to find the whole thing, you add. If you're trying to find a part, always subtract, guys. And just check your work because it makes it so much easier too, right? And now, last thing I want to go into, again, it's a topic that you learned about last week, right? Which deals with congruence, right? And what congruence means, just like last week, it means equal measures, right? Equal measures. And we worked with it when it came to segments, but it also applies to angles, right? So let's say I give you this angle here, right? Where we have these points over here. Let's call that point A. Let's call this point M. Let's call this point R. Let's call this point X, right? And now, again, since we're talking about congruence, we're talking about it to be equal. When we're dealing with angles, what we put to show that they're congruent is this curve, right? And what that curve shows, you can't put a tick mark on it just because it's not a segment. But since we have an angle, we put that curve, right? And it's the same idea with segments. If I have one curve here, I want to put one curve there, right? Because the second that I see that has one and that has one, it means they're both the same. And it doesn't just have to be one. If that has two and that has two, it means they're congruent. And again, it just means they have to have the same amount, which automatically means now if these two are the same, if that's 30, that's going to be 30. And that's all those arcs represent. It just means that they're both exactly the same, guys. Right? So, going with that idea, let's say I were to use this, right? And I were to tell you right now that angle, the measure of angle A, MX, is equal to 42 degrees, right? Again, 42 degrees, it's an acute angle because it's less than 90. So if I give you AMX is 42 degrees, I want you guys to find the measure of angle AMR, right? That's what I want you to find. And again, just looking at the information we know that AMX, we know that this angle is 42 degrees, right? Now, since we know that that's 42 degrees automatically, if that's 42 degrees, that's got to be 42 degrees, right? Because again, that has two curves, which means they're congruent, right? They're the same thing. So if that's 42, that's 42. If I want to find AMR, I want to find the whole thing, right? So now think, you know that this is 42. We know that that's 42. Whenever we want to find the whole thing, you add. So all you would do would just be 42 degrees plus 42 degrees. Sorry about that. Equals 84 degrees. And that's our answer. Just again, whenever you're trying to find the whole thing, always add. And always realize congruent. If that's 42, that's got to be 42 because they're both the same. Just one more I want to go over with you guys, just again, to make sure that you guys realize it. And it was one of those questions that people did make a few little mistakes on last week. Still dealing with congruence, guys. Right? If I give you this, right? I already give you that. Same thing, still dealing with angles, right? Dealing with the vertex right here. Right there, right here, right? Let's call that A, just keep it simple, C, D, E, right? And I would now tell you this too. Put a curve there, put a curve here, right? I'm going to tell you that the measure of angle ACE equals 100 degrees. And again, since it's 100, obtuse, right? Because it's greater than 90, less than 180. And what I want you guys to find, I want you to find the measure of angle DCE. That's what I want you to find. So now again, thinking about this, we know that the whole thing, we know that the whole thing, ACE, we know that this whole thing is 100 degrees, right? We also know that this is the same as that, right? Now since those two are the same, and we have two of them, the way you figure out each one is taking 100, dividing by 2. And the reason you're dividing by 2, again, you have two angles that are equal, that are exactly the same, that are congruent. And 100 divided by 2 gives us 50, right? And now if we check it, you know, if that's 50, you know, if that's 50, we see that they're both the same, and 50 plus 50 gives us 100. That's our answer. Always remember, guys, whenever you're trying to figure out angle measures, always work with what you have. Congruent means the same, always realize 2. An acute angle is greater than 0, less than 90. If it's exactly 90, it's right. If it's greater than 90 and less than 180, it's obtuse. And if it's exactly 180, it's a straight. Again, guys, you're trying to find the whole angle, you add. Trying to find a part, you subtract. Hope you guys did well with this. Hopefully, again, any questions, feel free to just ask me, guys. All right? Take care.